It's time we talked about PC ports. It's no secret that PC ports have been really bad lately. Clearly, I'm not just referring to the Steam Deck, but rather PC gaming at large, and as these poor PC ports have been accumulating, the discussion around this problem is beginning to reach a fever pitch, especially after a certain developer issued a pretty bad non-apology apology. And so I want to explore the question of whether or not this is a solvable problem. I don't simply mean can publishers prevent this. Alex Battaglia from Digital Foundry already gave a great overview on how publishers can ensure that they make great ports to the PC in his video titled 13 Ways to End Lousy PC Ports. Instead, my question revolves around, is there enough incentive for publishers to fix this problem, and can we as consumers help light the fire that creates that incentive? Up until now, our collective answer has been to vote with your wallet, and I have to ask myself, has that solution actually worked? And a deeper question underlying all of this is, how much do we as consumers actually care? I'm going to explore all of that in this video, but the way I want to start is to ask you, what do you think? Can we solve this problem, and how? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I also just want to say that this is pretty different from my usual Steam Deck news roundups, so if you're enjoying this video at any point, make sure to hit the like button, which lets me know to make more videos like this one. Okay, let's get started with a bit of context. This post went viral on Reddit, and then the picture started to make the rounds across social media since then. It showcases 6 different games that they say were broken at launch, and 2 more that may share the same fate. In fact, Redfall has launched since then, and yeah, it leaves much to be desired on the technical front, though to be fair, that's true for both the console and PC side of things. There's an argument to be made that Hogwarts Legacy wasn't broken at launch, but I think the general point stands nonetheless. One of the things I took away from this picture is that this problem is not publisher specific. Certainly there are some publishers that are not on this list and indeed have been consistently releasing solid titles on PC. In particular, Capcom has been doing great thanks to the resilient yet scalable RE engine. Despite that, this picture shows culprits from Square, EA, Warner Brothers, Koei Tecmo, Sony, and Microsoft. And given the state of Elden Ring at launch and the state of The Witcher DLC when that launched late last year, even Bandai Namco and CD Projekt Red are no strangers to this particular ailment. But one counter-argument to all of this that might come to mind off the bat is that this isn't a new problem. The PC has always had bad ports. Sometimes they were eventually fixed, either because a publisher cared enough to revisit the game or because some entrepreneuring modder endeavored to do it themselves. I think though that since that time we did enter a bit of a golden age for PC ports, and I would say that golden age only recently came to a close. Still though, it might be impossible to quantify how much better or worse the problem has gotten over time. It seems to me though that it would be sufficient to say that the situation we're currently in is not good and that we would like to see it improve. So how do we do that? The first thing I want to do is acknowledge the scope of the problem we're trying to solve. I do understand that it is an incredible challenge to make software for what amounts to an infinite combination of PC hardware, and I'm empathetic to edge cases that developers just weren't able to catch ahead of time, especially so if it's clear that they're doing their best to address it in a relatively timely manner. To that end, I want to make clear that I'm talking about instances that are more visibly preventable. Likewise, I think a lot of critics are responsible about how they discuss this. I watched a Digital Foundry review of Jedi Survivor, and one of the main things that Alex Battaglia points out is a shader stutter that happens early in the game despite there being a shader compilation step when you actually start the game. It demonstrated that this hitch met 3 conditions. Number 1, it would have been easy to catch during QA, if not earlier. Number 2, it's prominent enough that most players are going to encounter this problem and that therefore it should have been treated with high priority. And number 3, it's fixable. This is evidence, at least to me, that the problem is not just about how hard it is to make software that works across a wide array of hardware, but that there's also an element of publishers that are unwilling to fix problems, presumably because it would mean a delay in the schedule. And for many of you, I just triggered you to think of the infamous quote from Miyamoto. You know the one, "A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad." That quote though is all the way back from 1996, nearly 30 years ago. It's safe to say that a lot has changed since then, and if we're being literal about that quote, then it no longer holds true, right? A rushed game can be eventually good. Final Fantasy XIV, No Man's Sky, and Cyberpunk are all clear examples of this. Personally, I think that companies would stand to lose less money if they choose to delay a game that still needs work, but that doesn't mean that the game can't eventually be good. We've seen it happen now. In some cases, we even embrace the new normal. Early access is a model that by definition allows us to buy a game before it's finished. Certainly, I'm aware that there are many of you that refuse to buy a game that's still in early access, but there are many others still that are willing to dive into the deep end for a myriad of reasons. Nonetheless, the truth, at least in 2023, is a delayed game can still be bad and a rushed game can eventually be good. At least, I imagine that's exactly how the publishers are looking at this problem. And that brings us back to the original question. What can be done to convince publishers that a delay is worth the trouble? Well, let's consider who can put pressure on publishers and see which road makes the most sense. First, I guess governments could put pressure on publishers, but I think we can all agree that this is not at a level that warrants regulation. Next, storefronts could put pressure on publishers. Like maybe Steam could have a seal of quality that acts as a soft certification to say this game meets a certain standard. But I'll be honest, even if they were willing, I personally don't have much trust in a system like this. Deck Verified is meant to be a seal of quality for the Steam Deck, and certainly that has its issues. Also, Valve in particular likes to put power into the people's hands. They gave us stuff like Steam curators and user reviews, and they want those things to speak for themselves, so I don't see Valve doing something like this ever. Another one is game reviewers. Reviewers could potentially put pressure on publishers. There's a big debate happening across the different socials as to whether or not game review scores should take performance into account. My personal stance is that I'm not really a big fan of review scores, or really just the act of aggregating the review scores in the first place. I think you end up with situations like this where review scores just mean different things to different people. I find it best to read the review, but also to get a feel for what the reviewer is actually like. It's also why I've gravitated towards YouTube reviewers like SkillUp and ACG, because I can gain a good feel for what type of player SkillUp is or what type of player ACG is. I don't need everyone to play like I do, but I like to have an idea of where you're coming from when I hear your thoughts. But putting that soapbox to the side, there's an argument to be made that reviewers can in fact put pressure on publishers. Publishers are keen on Metacritic scores and can sometimes base their bonus structure off of those scores. To that end, if a game has poor technical quality and reviewers review it poorly, then by and large, it could motivate publishers to focus on better technical quality. On the other hand, these bonus structures aren't set in stone, and they could simply move away from basing bonuses on aggregate scores and instead just base it on sales even more than they already do. So as far as I can tell, that leaves us with only us, the consumers. Again, if I'm missing something, let me know in the comments, but I'm just left with the conclusion that only we as consumers really have the power to convince publishers that they're better off delaying a bad game than launching it now and dealing with the fallout. I do want to be careful with my words because I'm not particularly advocating for anything at this point, but I also worry that if I leave this in vague terms, that people will think that you can go as far as a harassment campaign, and that's a good way to flex our consumer muscle. So let me give an example that, again, is not something I'm advocating for at this point, because I think it requires more than just a single random person publishing an errant video to YouTube. The example I came up with is an organized boycott of pre-orders. That's easier said than done because number one, the keyword in the sentence is organized. Number two, I get the feeling a lot of my audience doesn't pre-order anyway, so I'd be preaching to the choir. And number three, gamers seem pretty averse to any sort of collective action, especially on the PC side where there's practically a gravitational pull towards individualism. That said, here are the benefits that I see when it comes to boycotting pre-orders. For one, it's not really asking much of the gamers. They're not really foregoing too much of anything. They will, forego some pre-order goodies, but I don't know, it doesn't seem like a big ask in terms of what you lose. Secondly, it not only puts pressure on the publishers directly, it also adds a layer of indirect pressure. Storefronts and stakeholders alike will push for publishers to get their act together so that the fire hose of pre-order dollars can resume flowing. So theoretically, if we could get the word out, I think it's something that would work, but we'd have to be clear on the stakes. Like, what are even our terms? When do we stop the boycott? This is the work that collective action takes, and it's incredibly hard to do even under normal circumstances, assuming we even want to do it in the first place. Which brings me to my final thought. How much do we actually care? I'm going to leave the word care open to interpretation here, but I think many of us stopped pre-ordering games a long time ago. In fact, many of us are happy to wait for a Steam sale to buy a game. It'll play better by the time a sale comes along anyway, am I right? And even if we do day one a game, we seem content with the tools we already do have, whether that's Steam refunds or user reviews or social media or discussion boards or just reminding people to vote with your wallet. Perhaps we feel heard even if the problem does still exist to some degree. So no, I don't have an answer. It really was just an open question that I wanted us to consider. Is this solvable? How do we solve it? And do we actually care? Let me know what you think. Goodbye.